Under consideration this time, K through 12 public education. Welcome to another installment of Under Consideration, a collaborative civic engagement project conceived and produced by Radio IQ WVTF Public Radio in cooperation with Blue Ridge PBS and Virginia Tech. I'm your host, William Fralin. On this episode of Under Consideration, along with our two guests representing diverse viewpoints, we'll be discussing K through 12 public education, a vital topic not just for the present, but for future generations of Virginians. As Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education. First, a little background. The original effort to create a system of public education in Virginia was proposed to the House of Delegates by Thomas Jefferson in June of 1779. However, the Virginia system of free public education was not established until the Commonwealth's Constitution of 1869. This early attempt was decentralized, it lacked standards, compulsory attendance, and the formation of schools was mostly the responsibility of parents who wanted their children to be educated. While progress was made over subsequent years, Virginia's system of public education was marred by regrettable chapters, including a lengthy period of segregation, followed by massive resistance, which closed publicly funded schools rather than allowing black children into what had been all-white schools. Even after federal intervention, many white parents remained skeptical about sending their kids to newly integrated schools. In September of 1970, a federal court ordered busing to integrate Virginia schools. In a public display of support, then-Governor Linwood Holton enrolled his 4 children in majority black schools, and in a memorable moment captured by news media, escorted his daughter to her first day of class at a Richmond high school. More recently, Virginia, like the rest of the nation, has become embroiled in the so-called culture wars. This has created additional challenges to the educational system. Virginia's public school system today enrolls 1,264,000 students in 132 school divisions, a 6% increase from 2022 to 2023. On this program, we search for common ground, a meeting place where diverse viewpoints on divisive issues that are discussed civilly and afford the necessary context required when exploring complex issues. As we pointed out in previous episodes, we're not here to change minds, but to allow for a greater understanding of diverse viewpoints. Before we dive into our deeper discussion, let's meet our two guests. Laura Bowman is a Roanoke County parent who served as the president of the Roanoke County Council of PTAs, chair of the Roanoke County Public Schools Parent Advisory Council, chair of the Prevention Council of Roanoke, formerly on the board Parents Across America. Through her volunteer work over the past 12 years, she has advocated for the health, safety, education, and well-being of children. Laura is known regionally for advocating on behalf of equal and quality public education. Laura, welcome to our program. Also joining us for this discussion on public education is Chris Brunlick, President and CEO of the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, Virginia's nonpartisan public policy foundation. Chris is also past president of the Virginia State Board of Education, where he served on the board for 4 years during the McDonnell and early part of the McAuliffe administrations. He was elected to serve 8 years on the Fairfax County School Board, where he was a strong advocate of research-based reading and math programs, system accountability, and greater opportunities for educationally at-risk children. Chris, welcome to Under Consideration.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Virginia's public school classrooms should be a safe haven for teachers and students. But instead, as we have witnessed far too often, schools have become the scene of violent attacks, including a shooting at a Newport News elementary school. The shooter was just 6 years old. According to the police chief, Steve Drew, he fired 1 shot, wounding his teacher.
Once the building was safe, forensics entered the classroom and processed the crime scene. I want to share with you what we recovered there. 1 spent shell casing, a backpack, a cell phone, and a 9mm Taurus firearm was recovered. I just want to reiterate that this shooting was not accidental. It was intentional.
The 6-year-old boy was not charged. His mother says she is willing to take responsibility for the shooting, but adds that her son's actions can be linked to ADHD. Shootings on campus, physical and verbal attacks on students, teachers, and administrators, irresponsible parenting, classroom disturbances due to emotion disorders, and alcohol and drug use all contribute to a tense teaching and learning environment. These factors have contributed to an exodus of educators. What can be done to reverse the trend of violence and bring about positive change in our classrooms? Where do we start? Chris, I'll start with you.
Thanks, I got the easy one. You know, one of the problems with education is that schools are now expected to solve all of the problems because everybody goes there at some point, and so therefore we can throw everything on the schools, and it's part of the problem with teachers because now they're expected to be social workers and food consultants and medical professionals and teachers somewhere in there. It's hard to comment on this particular one, having been sitting on the other side of the table. It sounds like the child has an IEP, that he was a special education student. There are federal laws that get involved. Clearly there was a mistake. By all reports that I've seen, and you have to wait for these things to go through the courts, the warning went up the chain of command, and somehow the top of the chain of command did nothing or didn't do anything adequate. And that's the first thing. But to create a safe environment is a challenge. One thing that I think we can do, you know, Fairfax County used to have a very, very strong policy against cell phones. And we wouldn't let anybody have cell phones on campus until 9/11, and everybody pulled them out. That was the days when cell phones didn't have buttons and didn't have cameras. And now we have situations where literally kids will start a fight in order to film them and post them on social media. Take the cell phones out of the schools. Ban them, deposit them. One of the school systems has bags now that they will seal them up, and they can only be taken out through going through a magnetic opener. There was a huge debate at one point over whether or not there should be SROs in the schools and school resource officers. And this happened after Connecticut. This happened again after the George Floyd case, when some school systems, not school systems, boards of supervisors and city councils said we're going to take the funding away for these things, even though the kids, the students, by like 70% were saying, please keep the school resource officers inside the schools. That ought to be beefed up if it's done right, because I've seen school resource officers, I've seen it done right. They become friends with the kids. I've seen it done right and I've seen it done wrong. I've seen the guy who's sat there handing out tickets because kids were smoking, and then I've seen the one who got to be friends with people and found out about the kid who did have a gun before he could do anything with it. We need to beef that up. We need to do better training on that, and I don't know that any school system is exempt from it, but at the end of the day, this is a societal problem, and we can't just expect the schools to be able to handle it on their own. We've got to change the way society is looking at things, and the way society is doing things, and the way society is talking to each other, and maybe this show is a start.
Maybe so, maybe so. Laura, what are your thoughts on school safety and your experiences?
Well, I understand the concept of mission drift, right? Where you know, all of society's ills are coming through the open doors of the school, and then the school system's employees are supposed to fix all of those things. They absolutely cannot, especially with the resources that they have. And when we talk about SROs in schools, you know, you have to make sure you have enough counselors. You can't have more police officers than you have counselors per student. That's one of the things that we need to lift the support cap in the state, better fund the standards of quality, because we need those mental health services in our schools for our children. You know, you just have, it's essential to have those supports because those problems are happening, some of them in the school, a lot of them happen outside the school, but we all have, you know, an obligation to look at each individual child and what do they need emotionally too. I think we need to talk about emotional quotient of children, because IQ is great and you'll go far in life with a high IQ. But if you don't know how to self-regulate, if you don't know how to get along with one another, if you don't know how to show respect for the people who are showing up each day trying to get you to the next level in your education and life, that's a real problem. And I think we need to have those expectations for the children. This is what's expected of you. And children can rise to reasonable but high expectations. And that makes it better for all the kids, because if you're in a classroom and you have a couple kids who are disruptive the whole time, that's unfair to the children who are not. And so an issue though then is, do you just take those kids out and sequester them and maybe rob them of some of the social things happening in the school and stuff? But we really have to talk about the safety of the whole, and what that exemplified in Newport News with that tragic shooting was that, first of all, parents need to secure their firearms in their homes. Children should have no access to that weaponry. Absolutely. I understand kids go out hunting in my part of the state and everything. That's fine. I'm just saying that you really need to be a responsible firearms owner. Number two, we need to really listen to our kids' teachers on the ground. They know what's happening. They know their students better than anyone else in that building. And so when that teacher, what it sounds like to me, was not listened to, you know, that is a failure of the chain of command there. That's a failure of accountability to listen to what's happening on the ground in the classroom, and that creates a completely unsafe setting. I will say too, when it comes to safe schools, not always is it the threat from the child within, right? It's also the threat from the person from without. And there are layers of safety that can be used. I don't like the fact that our kids have to, and teachers are subjected to lockdown drills. Some react emotionally to that differently than others, but I did listen to some years ago now, Michelle Gay, whose child was murdered at Sandy Hook. And she said, in time of crisis, we default to our level of training. And so that is another piece. It's so many layers, it's so complex. But again, I think if we can kind of talk about what is a safe school and how do we achieve that, and listen to the teachers and bring in safety experts and have conversations about having enough SROs, because you know there kind of aren't enough in my county. They're having a struggle trying to get enough, number one, and number two, that ongoing training, because not everyone is qualified to be in a school doing that work. It takes a special kind of person to create those relationships with the kids, and you know they should really just be checking every door all day long, because those layered points of entry are going to make it so that you know you're not allowing an outside actor to come in and wreak havoc in a school.
And to your point, I mean, I agree with you. And to your point about counsel, not every school is going to need the same level of resources, and it's something that we don't recognize enough in the way the standards of quality and the standards are written. Some schools might need 5. Some may not need any. We need to reflect that.
And school resource officers.
School resource officers, counselors in particular, any number of things. That's why the decision making needs to get back down to the local level, where frankly this can be done. You talked a bit about the emotional quotient, and you're right. What you do in some schools is also going to be very different. One of the things that there's a charter school group called KIPP Academy, and one of the things, it is very regimented. It is very regimented on the kids in terms of how they behave, what they do, what they're allowed to do, and it was criticized by a lot of folks who are from communities where maybe you don't need that. Mm-hmm. But frankly, if all you've got in the school is 6 to 8 or 10 hours a day, because some of these schools run much longer, you got to do what you can do to try to reinforce. I've been to a school in Richmond. Every student is walking in a line. Every student is reinforced to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. Every student, greets you and introduces themselves. These are things you don't see in a normal school, but it is being done there in order to reinforce what you do when you get to society.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, some parents who are not satisfied with the safety or performance of their public schools are opting out for other choices, among them charter schools and homeschooling. Let's start with charter schools, whose proponents want more of in Virginia, while opponents contend adding charter schools will take away precious resources better spent on improving underfunded public schools. In Virginia, there are 8 charter schools operating with about 1,300 students currently enrolled. That's less than 1% of total public school enrollment in the Commonwealth. Compare that to North Carolina, which has 130,000 students enrolled in 161 charter schools. Let's hear again from our guests. Is Virginia behind its southern neighbor in establishing charter schools, or do we have an appropriate level of school choice? Who wants to take that one?
Well, charter schools are always going to be a challenge in Virginia, frankly. There's a provision in the Virginia State Constitution that says the supervision of public schools, and charter schools are public schools, will be conducted by the school board, will be in responsibility of the school board, and that includes, there have been almost 24 court decisions since 1930 something, basically saying that school boards have absolute authority over curriculum, personnel, buildings, budget, and facility. Well, close enough. Over the 5 major components. Once you get past that, what else is there? Right. I don't think we're going to see charters grow in Virginia, except in very rare cases where you've got a school system that maybe you need to build some other alternative structure. But that's not going to happen. I think you're more likely to see over time state support for parents who want to be able to move their child to a private school that is outside of the public school system.
The voucher concept.
The education savings account concept, the tax credit scholarship concept, the voucher concept, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. But I think some level of state support. Look, if I had wanted to take my kids to private school, I could have done it, could have afforded it. So could you, so could you. There's a lot of people in this state that cannot. And those systems, they usually live in places where the school systems are not working. And everybody agrees they're not working. But everybody wants to recite Einstein's theory of insanity, which is we'll keep doing the same thing. It's not going to work that way.
Right. So, Laura, I don't know what your opinion is on charter schools. I think what I hear Chris saying is that in a lot of instances, people without means are trapped. They're in schools, that's the only option that they have. I don't know what you think about that. But.
Well, since about 2016, I've operated a Facebook page called Virginia Needs Public Schools, where I've chronicled the problems that charter schools have faced across the nation. And that's not to say that public schools don't have their fair share of problems. You know, neither system is perfect. But there is a lot of fraud, waste, mismanagement. There's a lot of counseling out. There's some cherry picking, so with charter schools that we have seen. And the fact is, children in underserved communities deserve to have equal opportunities for quality public education. And I'm of the mind that when we look at where charter schools began, right, the concept was like, well, let's get away from the constructs of the public school and those standards and rules and regulations that you have to fall within, and let's make these lab schools. Let's make these schools where you could kind of go outside the box, and then let's see what happened there, and then take the good ideas back to the public schools and make those better. But I will say this. When you come up with a good idea for education, there are people who want to cash in on that, cash in on kids' educations. And so then you see where the oversight by management companies, even if there's something called sweeps, where they will take money to manage the school. So money meant for instruction goes to a private management company, taking away from the funding for that school. And so I do believe that there's not so much will to have charter schools in the state, because if you want them, you may have them at the local level. I think there's just concern that you siphon off money from public education to a more private option there. What I kind of look at is like, what are the proven education reforms? We know because of data. It's a small class size, it's certified experienced teachers, it's full and fair funding, it's parent engagement. Guess what? Except for the parent engagement piece, all those things cost money. What does not cost money are the money makers. Standardized testing, computer-based testing, personalized learning. Those are actual money makers. Even private and religious schools, you could say that's since it's not public, it's private, it can create a profit. So that's where I kind of stand on that.
The governor's concept of lab schools run by
Right.
community colleges, I think is the idea, which is that sort of takes the profit piece out of it. Do you have any ideas about thinking about that?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of pushback since then. There was the lab school bill that didn't pass, right? But then it got in through the budget. But then what we're seeing is how is that money actually being spent? And it was supposed to be spent in public schools, but I think we're seeing it go into private hands. It's also kind of piecemeal. It's not like a full rich curriculum, a K through 12 curriculum. It's like, here's this little segment of the school that we can use for this lab. So I think we'll talk about a little bit of a mission drift there. I think that we were kind of sold something there in a way, and then what it looks like on the ground is a different story. It started off with $100 million for those schools. I don't know that they're going to get any more money for it. You can't just do the Mark Zuckerberg model of education where you just Facebook, like you just move fast and break things. Disrupting a system is not really conducive to long-term success. You really have to be very thoughtful in it. So I see how it began and where it is now, and I'll be interested to see what comes after that.
So much, and I'm sure Chris, I'm sure you have a different view of that, but maybe. It's very early in the process. I think you would agree with that. So to see how it ultimately works out. But Chris, what are your thoughts?
There are school systems that have been thoughtful about their process for 40 years and nothing has changed. First, let's make it clear, lab schools are not charter schools. And charter schools are run by local school divisions. They are run by the local school board. If one wanted it, they would do it, but they don't want them. They don't want anything that will even smack of creativity or inventiveness. What is the difference between a college partnership lab school and Maggie Walker or a governor's school or Thomas Jefferson High School, which run their own sort of regimes as best as they can under the law? I don't understand. Back during Governor Kane's administration, he spent a lot of time talking about the K through 16 path, that we needed to integrate all of that. And here we have a college partnership lab school that's proposing precisely to do that, precisely to do it mostly at public schools, a couple of private HBCUs, for example, Virginia Union wants to do one, Hampton wants to do one. They've recognized that the students that attend their schools need to get additional supports to get through college. They need to understand what that college experience is going to be. And yet now we're saying no. Charter schools, the literature shows pretty clearly that charter schools, particularly in urban environments, that Black and Hispanic students advance 9 months in reading greater than, over a year, greater than a regular public school, 12 months in math, greater than the regular public school, that Black and Hispanic students demonstrably do better in urban environments. Why wouldn't we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to do that? If our goal is educating children, why don't we want to do what works?
Well, I think we'll have a agree to disagree on that.
There had to be one sooner or later.
There had to be one sooner or later, exactly. Homeschooling started climbing in Virginia during the COVID pandemic. In 2020, total homeschooling topped off at about 38,000. In 2021, it jumped to nearly 59,000, and at the beginning of the 2022-2023 school year, it dropped a little to roughly 56,000. Those figures suggest that homeschooling became popular during the pandemic, but then remained a viable option for many Virginians. What factors do you think played a role in parents keeping their kids at home even after COVID? Chris, we'll start with you on this one.
I'm not certain. I'm not real close to the homeschool world. I think that a lot of parents saw what was being cobbled together, and it was being cobbled together. I don't begrudge the school system suddenly trying to turn on a dime and suddenly move everybody from in-classroom to online, and I think they saw what was being cobbled together. I think some parents saw what was being taught. They disagreed with it, and they didn't want their children to go back. I think some parents felt that their children were learning more from a very structured, dedicated, compact time of learning rather than through a full 6.5-hour day at school. But I honestly do not know why they've kept it. But clearly there's dissatisfaction and people are walking.
Right. So, Laura, what's your experience with the homeschooling world? Do you have any thoughts
I
on
would
that?
say that there's a lot more resources for families now, which is great. And you can kind of find your own little community of fellow homeschoolers, so it doesn't fall just on one parent. You can have that kind of community where you share resources. Another thing that is an interesting concept to me is like unschooling, where you have children have the opportunities to really look at their own interests, and then how does that relate to the real world? So it takes a lot of effort on the part of parents to make sure that their kids are getting everything they need for next steps in life. So it's a huge time commitment, I would say, for the parents, and a lot of resources. Not all families have that ability, but those that do, and do it well, I really don't have an issue with it at all. Those are their children. That's their choice. I would like to say that sometimes what happens, though, is and this is a dark side of it, could just be that why are they keeping them out? It could be abusive situations. So sometimes things happen that teachers see, and then they can report on that. And so that's one area. I'm sure it's a small segment where maybe you're not able to see the family dynamics and if there's any harm happening in the home. But I only bring it up just to say that is a small piece, but that is something that has concerned me for a long time. And I think the other piece that I want to talk about too is that what are the quality resources, right? Because we had an instant. There's another state. I hesitate to say it could have been Kentucky, where they found out that there was like online schooling happening, and thousands of people were tuning in, and they were talking about like white supremacists kind of things, and that to me is a little scary too. That the children just talk about indoctrination towards a more racist or bigoted or anti-Semitic way of thinking. So I think that's the whole thing about, do you want your tax dollars? Would they take that money and then propagate racism in their curriculum, and is that a good use of public tax dollars?
Gotcha. Well, from the homeschool perspective, of course, they pay the taxes but don't use the service. So.
Yeah, but that's of course part of the common good that we
Right.
collectively
Gotcha.
Because we want an educated populace for all.
There is a new phenomenon that we're starting to see, and it grew out of COVID, which is the pod idea, in which multiple parents would get together and begin educating their children.
Okay.
I met, I guess almost a month ago, with some people that had started micro school kind of situations, no more than 20 or 30 kids. They were all started by educators or former educators. I mean, I asked the person, what did you do before? What did you do? Every one of them was a former educator. They were not happy with public school teaching anymore for all of the reasons that we've discussed here, and they found this as an alternative. And they are, with 20 or 30 children, being able to educate kids and bring them up to speed, recover some of the stuff that was lost during COVID, and take it to the next step. How long that lasts, I don't know. As you said, there's a lot more resources now than there were then, and there are plenty of opportunities for the kind of socialization that used to concern people, and I think eliminates a lot of the possibility of an abusive situation, as you noted. But I think we're going to see more of that, because I think it's a unique combination of parents that may not be happy with the schools and teachers that aren't happy there either, and they're going to come together.
Well, thank you very much. As we draw to a close for this episode of Under Consideration, I'd like to give each of our guests an opportunity to share their thoughts before we say goodbye. But before we do, I've heard some areas of agreement. I think that you all have agreed on several different issues. The main one that pops in mind is local control, the importance of parental involvement. How do we encourage that? Some of those things. But I wanted to give you all each an opportunity to sort of summarize your thoughts about the program, and if there's any points you wanted to make that were left out or anything like that. So Laura, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think, we hear a lot of grumblings at a higher level about dissatisfaction with public schools, but really about 90% or so of us send our kids to those neighborhood public schools. They offer, meals, transportation, nurse in the school, what we hope is a high quality education, and that comes down to, enough resources given to the schools so that they can use them in the way that they need to use them to educate the students. And I think too that although we can disagree on some things, I think it's better to have good faith conversations where we can maybe dispel some myths, we can work on things that we all agree are a problem, and how do we best try to help fix those problems. And so I do think that our public schools are the hearts of our communities. In the rural parts of the state, they're the hub. You have the Friday night lights, you have the band, you have chorus, you have the arts. They have something that they try to offer something for everyone. If we could possibly get away from maybe just that one size fits all and allow some autonomy and some reaching the kids of where they are, and understanding that what happens in the community, what happens in the home impacts the school day, and that we shouldn't be scapegoating the public schools and the public school teachers. We should be talking about how do we create a world, a community, and a school system that just uplifts all children and creates opportunities for them to be the best they can be and prepares them for the next steps in their lives.
Okay, well, thank you. So Chris, any final thoughts?
Hard to beat that. Because I think we are very much in agreement on a lot of that. The public school tends to be the heart and soul of the community, even in Northern Virginia, which is much larger. I used to tell people when you're running for school board, if you were running for a district in a place like Fairfax County with 160,000 students, people don't care about Fairfax County public schools. They care about their school. They care about their high school. They care about how that band is doing and how that football team is doing. And at the end of the day, we want to do that, but we want to make certain that children come out of that system prepared to take their place in society as adults, whether they're going to college, going to work, that they have the skills, and frankly, the sort of soft skills that will mean that they show up on time and that there'll be another generation down the road.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Laura, and thank you for listening and watching. Under Consideration, a collaborative civic engagement project conceived and produced by Radio IQ Public Radio in cooperation with Blue Ridge PBS and Virginia Tech. Your comments and suggestions for future topics are welcome at radioiq.org. Until next time, I'm William Fralin.
Under Consideration is a civic engagement project of Radio IQ and Blue Ridge PBS, with financial support from the Virginia Tech Foundation. We welcome your feedback and suggestions for future topics. Contact us through our website, radioiq.org.